your name?
Ford.
Have you a surname?
No.
This group seems rough around the edges. But you seem clever. Hopefully we can make this work.
I think we should be able to. Yeah. I mean, I think amongst all of us, we should be fine.
Let's make it work.
We'll make it work.
Have you had these magic abilities your whole life like a kid?
No. Again, fairly recently.
Something happened?
understand.
Well, hello, stream.
A reward for this. I'm listening.
Today is going to be one of those slightly off-kilter days where I am going to have to run the kids to the bus decently soon here, but then I will come back and stream again. Good morning, Cameron. Good morning, Lady Temeraire. God damn it. Oh, all right. Weird. Oh, Lord. Well, today we commence upon a new audiobook. That's weird. Well, all right. Yes.
Legacy Books presents Weremage, a book of Underrealm. Find all the works of Underrealm at underrealm.net/books. Written and narrated by Garrett Robinson.
Okay.
Legacy Books presents Weremage, a book of Underrealm. Find all the works of Underrealm at underrealm.net/books. Written and narrated by Garrett Robinson.
Burp. Weremage. Okay. Excuse me.
Dedication. To my wife, who gave me this idea. To my children, who just make life better. To Johnny, Sean, and Dave, who told me to write. And to my rebels, don't forget why you left the woods.
Hi, Cameron. RMS is too low. Well, that's interesting. Okay. Okay. Audible, you're so consistent with your audio quality standards. That's my favorite thing about you, for sure. Just the consistency. Hey, morning, Nix. Not too bad. I'm kind of getting over a little head cold, which has been very fucking annoying, but, you know, what are you going to do? Oh, I should probably actually listen to this, right?
A warning. This book contains a scene of explicit sexual violence. I have tried to depict it both realistically and respectfully to actual victims of such violence. A further explanation can be found in my note at the end of the book. If this is something you'd rather not read, I completely understand, and I wanted you to know in advance. If you want to skip the part where it happens, it's in Chapter 42.
Hey, very nice. Hooray for antibiotics.
Chapter 1. The door to their chambers opened easily under Lauren's hand, and in the creaking of the hinges there were no echoes of the battle cries and bloodshed that still haunted her thoughts. Cool air brushed her face as the room was revealed to her, and she sighed. The sense of the High King's seat came rushing through the door, the heady salt of the great bay and the acrid smoke of the city's 10,000 hearths. She closed her eyes and drank them in. Lauren? Chet's touch on her arm brought her back to herself. She glanced over her shoulder at him. I'm sorry. It feels a lifetime since last we were here. A span of months, not days. I feel the same, he said quietly. But now that we are here, might we not go inside rather than standing in the hall without purpose? She chuckled and took his hand to draw him in after her. Inside, they removed their cloaks and hung them on hooks beside the door. To the left were Zane's and Jem's rooms. To the right were 2 more rooms where Chet and Lauren had once slept apart, though that had changed in the days since first they came here. Much of the furniture in the common room was new, its wood fresh-hewn and the cushions too bright to have seen much use. The tables and chairs that had once been here must have been destroyed in the fighting. That thought further dampened what was already a solemn day. For while many in the city rejoiced at the return of the High King Enelin, the wise knew it was no proud thing that she had been chased from her capital in the first place. 7 days it was since the seat had been attacked, and Lauren had helped Enelin escape the fighting. Her forces had fled to the kingdom of Selvin, thinking to muster a counterattack. But then, as swiftly as they had come, the attacking armies had fled. The fleet of Dulmoon sailed east across the Great Bay, vanishing into their mighty coastal fortresses. The Shades had rowed the short distance between the seat and Dorsey's eastern coast, and had disappeared into the birchwood. All the scouts the High King could muster had failed to find them since, and many who were sent to do so had never been heard from again. Since then, Enelin had granted Lauren a new position, Nightblade of the High King, her personal agent. It was a recognition of the valiant way Lauren had saved the lives of Enelin and her son, the Lord Prince Eamon. But other than a pretty name and a great honor, Lauren was not quite sure what it meant. The title of Nightblade had been a childhood fancy, something she had thought up when she was a girl of the forest. The world she found herself in now was all too real, all too perilous. What good was a daydream in the face of the dangers that Lauren had seen? "Sky above, come look at this." Chet's voice came from their balcony. The words made her tense for a moment, but his voice held only awe and no trace of fear. She entered their room, briefly noting the new bedclothes before she passed through it to the balcony. He stood leaning out into the open air, wiry arms spread as they gripped the railing. They were mayhap 30 paces high.
All right, and I do have to go take the kids to the bus, but we are officially rolling on the Weremage audiobook. And we shall roll further when I come back. Until I return, I shall leave you with the sweet, sweet tunes of Autumn Orange. Be back in a few.
Can I confide in you for something?
Oh, yes, please.
I'm a little unnerved about this sword. Would you stand watch for a second?
It seems like a bad idea, sure.
Nothing like this. I've never seen anything like this. Before, only in that dream where Vander was holding it. He pushed it in his chest, but this is smaller. This sword just seems to take in things.
Talk about or don't remember properly, I think.
Eldritch Fire! Magic's new to me. This sword is new to me. I didn't have most of this all of my life. All I had was my words to get out of situations, to try and heal conflict, to try and outsmart somebody. And now all of a sudden I have this power and I feel like it's a shortcut and I've been cheating myself. Eldritch Fire! Leave no trace.
No, I'm taking this.
Put it back or
I'm
I'll
taking this. Isn't worth my time. I'm taking this.
down.
Ford, put that fucking thing down.
I will fucking leave both of you here. We're either a team or you're working for yourselves. Decide.
As the sleep takes you, and the darkness of your dream state alleviates you of the stress of the day, your aching muscles turning numb, your physical form and consciousness now removed and aimless.
It said that you did your own dental work at one point. Did you do that on purpose?
When I was younger, they used to make fun of my teeth. And kids can be cruel, so I decided to take away the target that was most easily available for them.
Did you grow up with people who did not have tusks like you, and so you were different?
Yeah, at the time, there weren't any others like me. So, I feel like I was especially picked on for my teeth.
Do you still feel the same way about your teeth?
Not necessarily. It just kind of became a habit.
So you have to continue to do it?
I'm sure I don't have to. It's kind of like I was a bit tougher than most of the other kids. I felt like I could take the physical poking, but the jeering.
The emotional poking was too much.
This is many years later, though. You know, I can't imagine that any of us would even blink at tusks.
Do you ever want them to stay there?
Like to grow back?
Yeah.
Yeah, there are times. I've seen them. other bad forks with the teeth. I feel like it's a trait that sort of exemplifies the rougher side of my race. So sometimes I wish I had them, and sometimes I'm glad I don't.
Yeah, well, you know, for many of us, our early days are always with us.
Yeah.
So I understand.
This is how you see yourself, right?
I think it's how I like to see myself. Yes.
I mean, it's how we see you.
But I think you would look fine either way for it.
Yeah, I mean, we're too distracted with our own personal damage.
Right.
Yeah.
You saying I should let them grow out?
I'm just saying if you want to, you would look good that way as well. You look good this way, you would look good that way.
Co-signed.
All right, fair. How about you see me picking at them or chipping at them, any of that shit, and you just say the word and I'll stop. He was my mentor, a captain of mine, a man named Vandren.
I've heard you say his name before.
Yeah, I haven't seen him in quite some time. I don't know what any of this means, but I was back on shore and I didn't see anything of the ship or him or any of the other crewmates.
Maybe he's alive and you were seeing through his eyes right now.
I would like that.
Hey, we're back. Fuck. Oh. Howdy doody do this. Excuse me. Oh, boy. Okay. We are going to try real fucking hard to finish the Weremage QC this month. And I think that's more than realistic. Oh, this head cold.
They were mayhap 30 paces high, and had an excellent view northwest across the seat. The sun was still rising in the east, for the day was young, and the youthful warmth of its shine turned the winter air bracing rather than chilling. The city's smell struck her again, stronger than before, and she smiled without thinking. "What?" said Lauren. "What is it?" "All of it," said Chet. "Look at it. Look at them." He pointed. There, far below, she saw figures scurrying through the streets. A multitude of colors could be found: the red cloaks of mystics, the russet armor of constables, the white and gold of the High King's Guard, and all the liveries of soldiers and servants from across the 9 kingdoms. But most wore simple clothes, and carried tools or pulled them in carts: saws and hammers, lumber and ladders, all the accoutrement of craftsmen and artisans. They looked like a colony of ants from this high up, running frantically about in the chaos of a careless step that had crushed their hill. But their scurrying had a purpose. Their home had been destroyed, and they meant to rebuild it. "It seemed so simple when Annalyn called for them," said Lauren quietly. "I know it was not, but it seemed so. And just look how many of them have come to obey her. My father always said he would never take the High King's power, not for anything in the world," said Chet. "How frightening it must be, to hold such influence that your slightest whim can move an entire kingdom to action." Lauren nodded as if in agreement, but she felt her thoughts turning in another direction. Yes, the great and mighty could do much with a simple command. The High King Annalyn and the Lord Prince Eamon, and even Anwar, the King of Selvin. Yet who now walked in the halls of those mighty figures? Lauren of the family Nelda, the High King's Nightblade. The thought should have been terrifying, and she supposed it was to a degree, but she could not deny that it excited her. That, too, had been part of the dream of the Nightblade. Her hand brushed her dagger, which she now wore inside the waist of her trousers, covering the hilt with her green vest. The feel of it on her skin cast a shadow over the bright and beautiful day. The dagger was an ever-present source of danger. She could never stop thinking about it, and was always wary of letting it be seen by anyone but her friends. If it were ever revealed, the effects could be disastrous, not only to Lauren, but to the Order of Mystics, who might be the best defense against the rise of the Necromancer. Yet she could not bring herself to get rid of it. It had been her first theft, and by now she had learned 2 of the dagger's magical qualities: the ability to find wizards and the sight it could grant her even in pitch darkness. These had proven beyond useful, and had even saved her life on occasion. The Nightblade could not afford to throw away her most powerful tool. "Where has your mind gone?" said Chet, looking at her with his brow furrowed. "You have been drifting away more and more often of late. Do not think I have not noticed." "Nowhere," said Lauren, shaking her head. She ran her fingertips along his arm, sending gooseflesh rippling. "I am here with you." He smiled and put a hand on her cheek, his question forgotten. Her smile widened, but her thoughts turned sadly to how easy it was to guide his mind, just as on the day she fled their village in the birchwood. They heard a gentle knock behind them and turned to see Jem. The urchin boy stood in the doorway back to their bedroom, his knuckles still held close to the door frame as though he might knock again. He was dressed in finer clothes than Lauren was used to seeing him in, though somehow he had already found a way to get them dirty. "I have been sent to summon you," said Jem, looking at Lauren. Her stomach did a somersault. Without thinking, she reached for Chet's hand. Only once he had squeezed her fingers did she glance at him, earning a smile that should have encouraged her, but she could see a lingering sorrow behind it. "I must go," she said. "I know. Do not be afraid. You will do well." "You are more confident than I am, I fear." "I have followed you for enough leagues to know it." He stepped before her and kissed her lightly. And what is more, I call anyone who doubts you a fool. Jem cleared his throat a bit more loudly than he needed to. Yes, well and good, said the boy. Yet the council requires her presence. Lauren gave Chet's hand one last squeeze before brushing past him and into their chambers. She rushed through the common room, but Chet's voice stopped her again halfway through the door. Stop. She turned, steeling herself for him to ask her not to go. He did not want her to, and she knew it. But he only came forwards and reached past her to the hook on the wall. He brought down her fine black cloak from where she had hung it, and with gentle fingers clasped it at her throat. The Nightblade must be the Nightblade, after all, he murmured. Thank you, she said, kissing him again, and this time it was not gentle. Sky above, the council! Oh, still your tongue, Jem, said Lauren, rushing past the boy and into the hall. Jem scowled. Why should I, when the two of you never do the same?
That sounds really awesome, Nix. Excusez-moi. Come on. Bounce that track. Bounce, but bounce, but bounce, but bounce.
what is the Nightblade in truth? She has given you a title without a duty. It is meaningless. There has never been a Nightblade before, and so you cannot declare with any certainty what service you were expected to perform.
That was probably just bouncing Chet's voice, I'm assuming. Anyway.
Chapter 2.
Ah, yes.
Chapter 2.
There we go. That's that good.
Only once before had Lauren been to the High King's council room, but she remembered the way. Therefore she did not let Jem guide her like some page, but quickened her pace so that he had to trot to keep up, though he maintained an air of long-suffering dignity. "Who else will be there?" said Lauren. "I do not know," said Jem. "They did not summon me into the room, but sent someone out to tell me to fetch you. It is like when messengers ride day and night, relaying a letter from one to the next, except a bit more ridiculous since it all takes place in one small palace." Lauren shook her head. Only Jem had a high enough opinion of himself that he could think of the High King's palace as small. "Did you see Zane at all?" "No," said Jem. "In fact, I have not seen him since we came off the ship." They paused outside the council room. One of the High King's guards stood there, resplendent in her armor. She looked down at Jem with vague disdain. The boy stuck out his tongue at her. Lauren put a hand on his The boy stuck out his tongue at her. His tongue at her. Tongue at her.
There you are.
The boy stuck out his tongue at her. Lauren put a hand on his shoulder. "Thank you, Jem. Now be off." His eyes widened like a dog whose master was displeased with it. Might I not wait here, ready in case you should need me? I do not think I shall, said Lauren, and you will likely grow bored to death, for this may take some time. Jem's shoulders slumped. Very well, then. You may find me in my chamber if you need me. She watched him go until he turned the corner. Then, carefully avoiding the eyes of the guard, she entered the room as quietly as she could. The High King Enelin's council chamber was much like the woman herself. Restrain's council chamber was much like chamber was much like the woman herself, restrained, imposing, but not without warmth. There were some chairs around the walls, for retainers, Lauren supposed, though she had yet to see anyone sit in them. The main focus of the room, of course, was the table in its center, but that table was nowhere near so large as might have been expected. Rather than feeling ornamental, it gave the place an air of wartime preparation, and that air was particularly appropriate now, with all of Underrealm embroiled in conflict. At the head of the table sat Enelin herself, with one elbow propped up on the arm of her chair, her chin resting on her fist. To her right sat the Lord Prince Eamon, scratching at his short, well-trimmed beard, and beside Eamon was Zane, much to Lauren's relief. The wizard was often bitter and always sarcastic, but he was still the closest friend she had in this room. But to Enelin's left sat a woman Lauren did not recognize. Short, fat, and clearly old, for her hair was silver and her face bore many wrinkles. Something about her seemed similar to the High King, the sharp eyes and the severe twist to her mouth, though hers held something more of a smirk than Enelin's did. On her shoulders was draped the red cloak of a mystic. The four of them looked up the moment Lauren stepped through the door, and Zane hesitantly put his hands on the arms of his chair to stand. But Enelin lifted a hand to stop him. "Greetings, Lauren," she said. "I have 10,000 of councils to hold in the time it would take me to hold 10 proper ones, and so we must do away with decorum. You will pretend that these others have stood to greet you, and I will pretend that you have knelt to me. Please sit there." She pointed at the chair beside the gray-haired woman. "Yes, Your Majesty," said Lauren, hastening to obey. The woman scooted her chair over slightly to make it easier for Lauren to sit. "You two should know each other. Lord Chancellor, this is Lauren of the family Nelda, Nightblade of the High King. Lauren, this is Holland of the family Connell, the new Lord Chancellor of the Order of Mystics. The new Lord Chancellor of the Order of Mystics." "Well met," said Lauren, nodding. "This is the Lord Chancellor?" she thought. "I thought the mystics were all warriors." Holland flashed her a wide smile, as though she guessed at Lauren's thoughts. "Well met indeed. Do not fret over my looks, dear. I am not such a bumbling old woman as I appear, but only half so much, thank the sky." Lauren's eyes widened, and her cheeks flooded with red. I do not think." Holland laughed, and Enelin's lips pressed tight. "Forgive the Lord Chancellor. She has a habit of making people uncomfortable, which is often a useful skill, as well as a sense of self-deprecation that she finds most amusing. At another time I might agree with her, but there are urgent matters to discuss." "Of course, Your Majesty. My apologies," said Holland. Across the table, Zane caught Lauren's eye and winked. She gave him a quick smile in return. "Lauren, we three have spoken about you already, and I have come to a decision," said Enelin. Lauren did not much like the sound of that. "I know that the politics of the 9 kingdoms are not familiar to you, but I cannot take the time to explain them in detail. Suffice it to say that while we balance on the brink of open war, we have not yet fallen into it, and now we must put forth every effort to keep that from happening." That made Lauren balk. "Forgive me, Your Majesty, but how can that be? A battle has already been fought." "One, yes," said Enelin. "But it is my understanding that you were at Welmont. Did that battle mean that Selvin and Dorsey were at war? Lauren pursed her lips. I suppose not. But Selvin would have been well justified in declaring such a war. Enelin frowned, but across the table, Eamon's jaw clenched. Lauren wondered if he dared disagree with his mother. The Lord Chancellor interjected. War brings only destruction, girl. No one should wish for that, no matter how justified they feel their cause to be. Our ruler's noblest purpose is the preservation of life whenever possible. All here agree that open war with Dulmoon may be inevitable, but we must do all we can to avoid it, while any chance of doing so exists. Forgive me, Your Majesty, for I would never think to advise you on matters of which I know little, said Lauren slowly. But is there nothing to be said for justice? Has the kingdom of Dulmoon not wronged the rest of Underrealm, and should they not pay a price for it? The High King leaned back in her chair, steepling her fingers beneath her chin. The room went suddenly very quiet, and Lauren's throat became as dry as sand. I have spoken out of turn, she said quietly, ducking Enelin's gaze. Forgive me. No, this should be addressed, said Enelin. After all, you are now an agent of a king, and therefore you ought to know the way a king's mind works. Tell me, Lauren, how many people have you killed? None, Your Majesty, said Lauren at once, and then she felt a pang of shame as she remembered her father. Or one, but it was not my intent to do so. I only tried to defend my life and the life of another. She risked a glance at Zane, who met her gaze solemnly. That is what I have been told, said Enelin. You have decided that lives are not yours to take, and that if someone must die for their crimes, then that is up to the king's law. Do I have the right of it? Yes, Your Majesty. Yet a moment ago you seemed to wish that Selvin had gone to war with Dorsey, and now you think that we should go to war with Dulmoon. Tell me, Nightblade, what happens in war? Lauren looked up with a frown. Your Majesty, you have seen battle. What do soldiers do to each other in battle? They kill each other. Enelin nodded. I could say that it was the fault of my soldiers for doing so. It would be easy to blame them for cutting down my enemies upon the field. But the truth is that if I declare war, every life lost is my responsibility. I say my responsibility and not my fault, for they are not the same. I will bear that burden if I must, but I am not eager for it. You say you will not kill, and that might be called a noble vow. But if you only wish for others to swing the sword, you say you will not kill. You will not kill, and that might be called a noble vow. But if you only wish for others to swing the sword in your place, then you do not hate death. You only want to be able to tell one and all that your hands are still clean. And that is not so noble a purpose. Lauren wished that she could vanish from sight. None of the others at the table would look at her, like children sitting awkwardly while their mother chastised a sibling, only wishing for the moment to pass. But then she steeled herself and raised her head, meeting the High King's gaze. Again, I apologize, Your Majesty. She kept her tone measured but earnest. I am unaccustomed to sitting at so high a table where matters such as these are discussed. I vow to you that I will learn, and I beg for your patience as I do. Enelin smiled, and the room's tension evaporated at once. That is well said, and shows a humble heart.
Hey, Vale, good morning.
It is a wise soul who seeks to learn instead of clinging to the belief that they are right. Now, back to the matter at hand, ending the war with Dulmoon before it begins. The key to such a strategy is making war appear not only undesirable, but hopeless, said Eamon. That could divide Dulmoon and turn the nobility against their king. Lauren cocked her head, confused, and Zane spoke up. It is our hope that some in Dulmoon may be convinced they cannot win. If the noble families think that war is hopeless, it may prompt them to overthrow Bodil, Dulmoon's king, and appoint a new ruler who will make peace. I understand, said Lauren, though that was only half true. How may I help? In all honesty, I am not certain, said Enelin. Yet something tells me that you have a role to play. You have displayed two talents in great abundance, Lauren. An ability to gather information and a strong sense of duty. These are valuable skills, and I regard them highly, but they are yet untempered. Therefore, I mean to place you in the service of Cal of the family Endil, who sent you to me in the first place. I have raised him to the position of Grand Chancellor of Feldemar, the Lord Chancellor's former position, and he is also my Master of Spies. Under his guidance, I have no doubt you will prove yourself most useful to the preservation of the Nine Kingdoms. Lauren's heart skipped a beat. Almost she blurted, You are sending me away? She looked to Zane. Cal was Jordel's master also, you will remember. He spoke quietly, and she saw pity in his eyes. She swallowed hard. Do not be a foolish girl, she told herself. You entered the High King's service. What sort of servant would you be if you disobeyed her command? So she stilled her hands on the table and turned to Enelin. Very well, Your Majesty, she said. I serve at your pleasure. From the corner of her eye she saw Holland give an approving smile, while the Lord Prince nodded. Excellent, said Enelin. I ask only that you obey Cal's instructions and learn from him what you can. Never forget, Lauren, our task is of the utmost importance. We do not fight for peace only to keep me on the throne. That would be a limp and insipid reason to ask so much from so many. We fight instead for the preservation of Underrealm itself, and that is a greater purpose than any one person's simple ambition. Without the order of the Nine Kingdoms, all would be chaos. Can I count on your aid to preserve them? The Lord Prince looked solemn, and his brows drew together. Lauren gazed at him for a moment, wondering what must be going on inside his mind. He, the presumptive successor to the throne, and not all that much older than she was. You can, Your Majesty, said Lauren. And you, Your Highness and Lord Chancellor. I have already seen the fires of war licking at the trees of the birchwood that I call home. I will do anything I must to douse the flames, and give my life if need be. Eamon met her gaze then, his eyes bright and his head held high. He nodded, and though he spoke no word, she could almost hear him thank her. Well spoken, said Enelin, though I pray it does not come to that, and I hope you will not throw your life away needlessly. Serve Cal as best you know how, and I will consider your duty fulfilled. Arrangements will soon be made for you to go to him in the stronghold of Ammon, where he resides. Ammon, said Lauren quickly. Yes, said Enelin. Jordel's home. Lauren's breath caught in her throat. Jordel had meant to bring her to Ammon, her and Jem and Annis all, before he had fallen in the Great Rocks. But moreover, Annis was there now, and Lauren's heart leaped at the thought of seeing her friend again. Now we must discuss something more somber, said Enelin. She looked to Zane. The wizard cleared his throat and sat up, folding his hands on the table before him. Lauren had felt a sense of warning before, and that had faded, but it redoubled now. Whatever decision Enelin had come to, this was the heart of it. I cannot travel with you any longer, said Zane. The room fell to silence, except that at the edge of hearing, Lauren thought she heard a high whine, like a gnat buzzing in her ear. The whine was soon replaced by her own pulse, thundering as she grew suddenly lightheaded. I thought you were done trying to abandon me on the road, she said, trying to keep her tone light. Zane did not so much as smirk. I was, he said, but now I have returned to the seat, where I always meant to go, and I have my son. I could not come with you and bring Aaron along. She did not answer. She could not answer. Of course not, she thought, and you know I would not ask it. Moreover, Zane went on, the High King has asked a duty of me, and I have agreed to it. No doubt you remember the Dean of the Academy, said Enelin. Cyrus of the family Drayden. You met him briefly. I do remember, said Lauren. She also remembered that Cyrus had not been there to defend the High King in the Battle of the Seat, and rumors flew that he had abandoned his charges at the Academy as well. Cyrus has not been seen since the day the seat was attacked. It may be assumed that he perished in the fighting. Enelin kept her tone carefully neutral, but Lauren saw the disdainful sneers that twisted the faces of both Zane and Eamon. She herself wanted to laugh out loud, but she kept her composure as Enelin went on. Now the Academy needs another dean, and I require an ally in that position. With Underrealm on the brink of war, I cannot choose a dean for political reasons, the way I did when I chose Cyrus. You mean that it would be foolish to appoint another Drayden, said Eamon lightly. This is a small council, Your Majesty, and all upon it are trustworthy. You may speak freely, I think. Enelin gave him a cool stare, and then went on as though he had not said anything. In any case, I require someone I can trust to remain loyal, and I have selected Zane. I asked him, and he accepted. Then it appears congratulations are in order, Dean. Lauren could not help the way her mouth twisted. Enelin must have sensed her mood. She put her hands flat on the table and said, Very well. Those are the only matters I required you for. Your travel to Ammon will be seen to shortly. The dismissal was clear. Lauren stood from her chair and bowed. Thank you, Your Majesty. But before she turned away, she saw Zane give the High King a quick glance. Enelin nodded in response, and Zane stood to follow Lauren from the room. I shall see you out, he said. Lauren shrugged. If you wish. In fact, she did not want him anywhere near her, but thought it would be unseemly to recoil from him in front of the High King. Once they were in the hallway, however, she walked as far from his side as she could, and stormed into the palace garden. Winter bit at her cheeks, and she drew her cloak close about her, thankful the first snows had not yet begun to fall. I am sorry, said Zane from behind her. You have done nothing that requires an apology, said Lauren. The High King commanded you. She did not command me. She asked and I accepted, and I am sorry. Then take it back. She turned to him, blinking against the sting in her eyes. Take it back and come with me. I cannot, he said, fists clenching by his sides. Lauren, my son, I cannot leave Aaron again, and I cannot bring— I know, cried Lauren, far louder than she meant to. But it felt good, and so she kept shouting. I know you cannot take Aaron into such danger. Why do you think I am angry with you? Because I cannot be angry with you at all. Nor could I be mad at Jordell or Albern when they— She stopped short and turned away, blinking harder. That had not been a fair thing to say, and she knew it. Why, then, did she not turn and apologize? But she could not when Zane meant to leave her alone the way he had often enough before. I thought the same thing, he said. To her shock, Lauren heard the thickness of tears in his voice, and when she turned, he wept openly. The moment Enelin asked me, I thought of how I was leaving you again, the way I had promised not to, and the way Jordell and Albern did. That thought has plagued me since, yet I do not see another choice. Aaron, I have my son, and I— Be silent, said Lauren. She forced a smile. Still your bleeding tongue, wizard. You only repeat yourself, and we have said all we can say. And if there is one thing we have learned after all the leagues we have walked together, it is that you always wanted to be rid of me. Before he could answer, she seized the front of his coat, drawing him in for an embrace as his tears fell upon her shoulder.
Ugh. Emotional damage. But I get to bring them back together in the next book. So many people get to see each other again. It's going to be a lot of emotions. If I'm not mistaken, the last stream I did where I was actually actively writing on Quest, I had to end off because I wrote a reunion scene, the outline for a reunion scene, and I started crying really, really hard. Why do I do this to myself? What's wrong with the audio? Still too low? Oh, what a crock of shit. Oh. Right. No, that makes sense. Bounce faster. And this audio is going to work perfectly. And ACX is going to take it. Ugh, come on. Okay.
Chapter 3. Chet did not take the news well. He sat silent with his fists clenched as Lauren spoke of the council. Across from their couch, Jem sat almost sideways upon his chair, swinging his legs back and forth over one of the arms, his eyes wide and his mouth slightly open. When Lauren finished, he straightened and gave a bright laugh. "Wonderful! Helping to prevent a war will make a fine addition to the tales of you that already fly across the 9 kingdoms. I think you greatly overestimate how far such tales have spread," said Lauren. "How can I? The High King herself had already heard of the Nightblade before she brought you into her service. What better bard could you wish for than one who brings tales of your exploits to the highest of thrones?" But Chet sat silent in his chair, picking at one fingernail with another. Lauren could feel his sullen displeasure, and it worried her. The look on his face was not unlike the look he had worn in the birchwood when her father threatened her, or hit her, and Chet had held himself back only at Lauren's urging. Jem, however, seemed oblivious to it. He sat forwards in his chair and slapped his knees. "And we will get to see Annis again. We have not received word from her in days. I wonder if she already knows we are coming. I should write her a letter." "It can hardly get there before you will," said Lauren. "It will not be long before we leave the seat." "Might Lauren and I speak alone, Jem?" Chet's voice was quiet and firm, and it cut its way into the conversation like a footman's sword. Jem's smile dampened, and he glanced at Lauren. She nodded. "Very well," said Jem. "I am famished anyway, and I think one of the cooks likes me, for she hardly tries to strike me at all anymore when I steal food from her. I will return shortly." He bounced carefree on his feet as he slipped from the room, but Lauren did not miss the worried look he gave them. Once the door had closed again, Chet sat up on the couch and placed his elbows on his knees, folding one hand over the other before his eyes. "Why do we not leave?" said Chet. "I mean to," said Lauren lightly. "For Ammon." "Do not do that," he said softly. "Do not pretend ignorance of my meaning. Why do we not leave this war behind?" "We have come this far," said Lauren. "Why not see it through? And besides, I took the role of Nightblade." "You did? And what of it?" said Chet. "What is the Nightblade in truth?" She has given you a title without a duty. It is meaningless. There has never been a Nightblade before, and so you cannot declare with any certainty what service you are expected to perform. I suppose, then, that it is for me to decide. I am able to determine the course of my life, the way I never could before. Hardly. You have put that control in the hands of the High King. Enelin has my allegiance as well as yours, but do you truly think she holds your safety as her highest concern? Lauren looked at him sharply. Do you think that is my highest concern? She thought to shock him, but he only rolled his eyes. Have you even decided how long you mean to serve her? Will you do so for the rest of your life? I had not given much thought to it, but I will not leave the 9 kingdoms to their own devices while the threat of war looms over them. Chet stood and went to a side table that held a flagon of wine. He filled a cup for himself and arched an eyebrow at her. She nodded, and he filled a second. And what does the High King mean for you to do? He asked, changing tack. Obey Cal, of course, but what does that mean? Have you wondered what they intend to do with you? For I have an idea. He placed the cup in her hand. Lauren took a sip, but a light one, for she wished to keep her mind sharp. It felt as though they were sparring, and she did not like it. She let some of the bitterness come through in her tone. Let us hear it then, O wisest of advisers, for surely I would be lost without you. I think they mean to send you after Rogan. That gave her pause, as he must have known it would. Just the brute's name was enough to strike fear in her. Suddenly the High King's palace seemed no safer than a flimsy woodland shack. Lauren did not often dream, but in recent days Rogan's dark face had plagued her sleep more than once. Her silence had stretched long, and Chet wore a self-satisfied look that irked her. She sipped her wine again and shrugged. Mayhap that is indeed their plan. If so, it is Rogan who should be afraid. When he found us in Northwood, he had the advantage, and we were the ones pursued. Now I walk with all the power of the High King behind me. Who does he have? The Shades? They lick their wounds in some unknown hole, likely hiding in the birchwood and hoping we will forget about them. Dormoon backs him. Lauren snorted. 1 kingdom against the other 8. And do not forget that the mystics are on our side. Chet frowned into his cup. Rogan does not seem the type of man to begin a war without some hope of victory. But he could not put much strength in the words. Never would I compel you to walk a road you deem dangerous. I told you in Northwood that you were under no obligation to come with us. So you did, and I said then that I do not follow you out of obligation, said Chet. I came because, well... He trailed off, and his cheeks flushed with something other than the wine. We are no longer children, Chet, said Lauren. Speak plainly. Because I love you, he said, the muscles of his jaw twitching. I know it and you know it, though I may feel like a moon-eyed child when I say the words. I've only ever wished to keep you safe. When that meant fighting beside you, I did so willingly. But when it meant urging you to flee the troubles of Underrealm, I did that as well. You refused, and still I followed you, and I will again. But I will not stop warning you of peril when I see it. Do so if you must, said Lauren. Only do not forget, for both our sakes, that I will continue to ignore you and press on regardless. His nostrils flared. How can I forget when you have never done anything else? She bit her tongue and turned her gaze away from him. She knew well that this was futile, and Chet likely did as well. I should like to take a walk, she said. No, I'm sorry, he said, slumping back and shaking his head. You do not have to leave. It will give us both time to cool our heads and to think upon this, she said. Each of us knows what the other will say. Let us then have the argument separately, in our own minds, so that it need not drive a wedge between us. She gave him a wan smile. He did not look up at her, and only put his hand to his forehead. as though he wished to say more but did not dare to. But as she passed him on her way out the door, he reached suddenly forth and took her hand, squeezing it. She returned the pressure, and at last their gazes met for a moment. She left.
Quick bathroom while those files upload. Be right back. Da-da-da-da-da. So we're still a day ahead on our on our monthly hour goals, but we're only a day ahead. At the start of the month, we were 3 days ahead. And I would like to try to get back to that if I possibly can. What are you?
I am glad to see you reunited, but that is not the end of the news I have for you.
Zane. Oh, buddy. You've been through so much. And you're going to go through so much more.
Chapter 4. She did not return to the room until after nightfall, and Chet had gone to sleep already. She lay beside him, and he stirred without waking to wrap an arm around her. She lay beside him, and he stirred without waking.
Why do you keep doing this to me?
She lay beside him, and he stirred without waking to wrap an arm around. He stirred without waking to. Out.
There you are, you ugly piece of shit.
She lay beside him, and he stirred without waking to wrap an arm around her. His warmth soon sent her to slumber, but then a dark dream seized her, dragging her mind into its depths and filling her with despair even in sleep. Lauren found herself standing beneath the boughs of the birchwood. Somehow she knew it was the day she had left, but instead of the brown cloak she had worn on that day, in the dreams she wore the black cloak Damaris had given her. Zane was nowhere to be seen. Dark storm clouds churned in the sky. She panicked as a branch snapped behind her. Whirling, she saw her father. An arrow was buried in his chest, just below the collarbone, so deep that the head of it protruded from the flesh in the back. His body was covered in blood, and from the squelch he made when he moved, she knew it had run down to fill his boots. "But I did not shoot you in the chest. It was the leg." She thought the words, but she could not say them aloud. When she saw his face, she gasped. It was twisted in hate, and his flesh had begun to rot. Something had eaten away most of his left cheek, and his teeth showed through the hole. His eyes were sunken, for the meat around them had wasted away. A few fingernails had torn off. Dirt was caked deep beneath the ones that remained, dirt from his attempts to drag himself back to their village. "You ungrateful wretch!" he screamed, so loud that she jumped. He spat at her feet. "You were never my daughter." He lunged at her, and she cried out. But in mid-air he vanished, and the world around her dissolved to mist and shadow. Then the shadows took form, and the light turned silver. She looked up to see the moons peeking at her between the rooftops of Cabras. The alley she was in seemed familiar. A figure in a deep green cloak stood only a few paces away. Lauren stirred at the sight, and her breath quickened, for the figure's shape was familiar to her. The green cloak rippled in the moon's light as she stepped forwards, hips swaying. Her movements were every bit as enchanting and seductive as the first time they had met, and Lauren's heart fluttered just as it had then. In the waking world, of course, she knew that Auntie was a sadist, a murderer, and worse besides. But in the dream, she knew none of these things. Auntie stepped around and pressed up against her back. Delicate fingers traced along Lauren's arms, and she shivered, her chest tight, her skin aching for the touch to linger. She could not force herself to move. "It is the way you hold yourself," whispered Auntie, her breath brushing Lauren's ear. A hand took Lauren's hip firmly, and she released a shuddering sigh. "The way you put one foot before the other, just so." She placed a foot before Lauren's, so that now they were pressed even closer against each other. But then the foot moved quickly to the right, and Auntie pushed her hard. Lauren yelped, tripping over the woman's ankle. She rolled quickly onto her back, but Auntie was atop her fingers grasping for Lauren's throat. "This is not vengeance," she hissed. "It is justice." Lauren fought, trying to wrestle herself away, but then the world dissolved to nothing again. There was wood beneath her hands, and warm air blasted her face. She was on the deck of a riverboat. Upstream, a ship pursued her, but no crew manned it. The captain, Brimlad, was nowhere in sight, and neither were Jem or Annis, but Zane sat against the wall of the riverboat's cabin, his hair thin and wispy, withered arms wrapped around himself. Lauren shuddered as she saw the black glow in his eyes. The ship had seemed at least a league away, but suddenly it appeared only a few paces behind them. Looking up, Lauren saw a small figure in a red cloak. Vivian's eyes glowed with mage light, and she raised her arms. "Abomination!" she cried. Black burns rippled along her skin, turning her into a twisted, mangled thing. Lauren turned to see Zane, but the wizard had gone. Had he gone below? But then she saw her own hands. They were wasted, the skin almost transparent, just as Zane's had been when he ate the mage stones. She clutched at her hair, and it came away in her hand. A scream ripped from her throat, thin and feeble and blood-curdling. She fell to hands and knees, and the world vanished again. Now her fingers scraped on stone. Lauren feared to look up, but something compelled her to. Damaris stood before her. They were in a cavern. Lauren knew not where, for unlike all the places she had seen thus far, this was nowhere she had been in real life. The edges of the room were dark, with not a torch to be seen, and the only light fell from a hole in the ceiling far above to pool around Damaris in a perfect circle. Lauren's body had returned to health so that she could have stood, but fear shuddered in her limbs. Damaris's eyes were filled with an icy fury, and Lauren cowered before it, certain that the merchant was here to take her revenge at last. "Get up," said Chet. "We are with you." His hands took her shoulders, and with his help she found her feet. He stood to her right, and looking to her left she saw Jem and Annis. Jem had his sword out and held forth, as though ready to do battle, while Annis's fists were clenched at her sides, as though she might try to box her own mother. Then Lauren's gaze drifted past Damaris, to a man standing just behind her. He had the brown-skinned, dark-eyed look of a Wadeland man. His black hair was cropped short, and a scar split his chin. He wore the blue and gray clothing of a shade. She knew she had never seen him before. "Who is that?" she asked Annis, but when she turned, the girl was gone. Jem and Chet, too, had vanished. And then she saw that they all knelt before Damaris, facing Lauren. Chet was chained, and his eyes were mad with fear. Damaris held a dagger at his throat, but it was an old, rusted, twisted blade, nothing fine like Lauren would have expected the merchant to have. "You take my daughter?" said Damaris, her voice a harsh rasp. "Foolish girl, I will take everything." The dagger hissed as it laid Chet's throat open. His lifeblood splashed across the stones, and his mouth worked silently as he tried to cry out. Lauren screamed and fell on her knees before him, putting her hand to the wound, trying helplessly to hold it closed. But she could feel his life slipping away between her fingers. Her shouts could not save him. Nothing could. "No!" cried Lauren. "Jem, Annis, help me!" But when she looked up, she found that they were not chained after all. They never had been. A hungry light was in their eyes as they regarded her. Jem bared his teeth with an animal's snarl, and he pounced upon her. She felt his teeth sink like needles into her neck. Lauren woke at last, screaming and thrashing in her bed. "Stop! Stop! Lauren! Someone help!" Hands seized her in the darkness. Lauren swung a fist in the dark, screaming louder. She struck Chet right where the dagger of a shade had wounded him. He screamed in pain, and the sound of it was like agony in her heart. At last, her mind was dragged to the present. Chet! No. I'm sorry. The door to their room crashed open. Zane and Jem ran in, stopping just on the threshold. Zane's eyes glowed white with magic, and Jem brandished his sword. At the sight of the boy, fear seized Lauren, her mind returning to the dream and his bared teeth. "What is it?" cried Zane. "What is wrong?" I... Lauren shook her head, forcing herself to speak. "It is nothing. Nothing. A nightmare." Zane's brow furrowed, and the light did not fade from his eyes. He ran to the balcony door and opened it, looking outside as though for a prowler. Then he rushed to the closet at the other end of the room and peered within. "I am fine, Zane," said Lauren, growing exasperated. "There was no one there. It was a dream." When he knelt and looked under the bed, she got to her feet and lifted him back up. "Stop. It is nothing." "Nothing," said Chet, still rubbing his chest where she had struck him. "It did not sound like nothing." Zane stood, and at last he doused his magic, but his frown remained. "You sounded as though skilled torturers had you under their knives." "Mayhap they did," said Lauren, "but only in my mind. Look at me. Do you see any wounds?" Without answering, he went to the wall where 2 robes hung on hooks. He pulled one down and threw it to her, and she put it on gratefully. But no sooner had she covered herself than he seized her face, and she yelped as he pried at her eyelids with his fingers. "Your eyes are wild," he said, ignoring her attempts to escape. "Jem, fetch an apothecary, and tell them to bring dream wine." "No, Jem," said Lauren, finally forcing Zane's hands away. "Sky above, Zane, I tell you I am all right." The wizard's frown deepened. "I am not sure of that, though I will allow that you seem to be safe. Have you been eating?" "The same as you." "Have you been... How much wine did you drink?" Lauren forced a laugh. "I am no drunkard." "So says every drunkard." But she could hear the tension leach from his voice. "I could fetch more wine, if you wish," said Jem from behind him. "I feel I could use a cup myself, for your screams still ring in my ears." Lauren's spirits dampened at once as she looked at the boy. Jem looked the same as always, and the same impudent smirk tugged at his lips. Yet the memory of her nightmare would not leave her mind. She shook her head and tried to smile. "No, Jem. I only need sleep, and I would wager you do as well. Off with you both." Zane did not move, not until she took his shoulder and ushered him gently out. Jem went more readily, and was already yawning by the time he re-entered his room. Once they were gone, Lauren closed her door and turned to the bed. Chet sat up, his bare chest glistening in the moon's light, one hand still on the scar of his dagger wound. He studied her in the dim silver glow through the window. "Lauren, what is wrong?" "Nothing," she said lightly. She cast her robe on the floor and gave him a moment to take her in before sliding beneath the covers. But it did not distract him. "You can fool..." before sliding... him a moment to take her in before sliding beneath the covers. But it did not distract him. "You can fool Jem and Annis, but I know you are lying." She was not so sure she had fooled Zane, for the wizard's eyes had been troubled. But still she kept her smile and ran a hand up his arm. "That is a strong accusation. How is your wound? I did not mean to hit you. I was not myself when I woke." "It is all right," said Chet. "The pain is fading." She bent to kiss the scar, and as her other hand squeezed his shoulder, she felt him relax. "Good. It is a mark of honor. I would hate for you to regret earning it." Though his eyes were still grave, that forced a chuckle from him. "As though that is why I would regret it." His frown returned. Are you certain you are all right? What did you dream of? Lauren felt her smile grow strained. I do not remember, she said. A sick feeling grew in the pit of her stomach at the lie. Mayhap it was the Battle of the Seat. That was no happy memory. He hesitated, and for a moment she thought he would answer, but he only shook his head and turned away to lie upon his side. Soon he was asleep once more, but Lauren lay awake all the rest of the night, until the silver of moon's light gave way to the pink blush of dawn. And she felt that eyes watched her in the darkness, the eyes of every enemy she had left behind her, between the paths of the birchwood and the palace of the High King.
Okay, that'll probably be it for me today. I say probably, by which I mean definitely. And we'll pick right back up tomorrow. Which means it's time to pick a target for a raid. Who are we going to raid? Well, it appears we're going to raid Ray Music because she's the only one I follow who's live right now.
My goodness, thank you.
Ah! That was loud. Okay, we're officially cranking on an audiobook. We got 2 hours done on it today. We're slated to complete it in 20 hours, so if we can keep this pace up for 10 days, it should be done. I actually would like to get it done faster than that, try and put in some extra time or maybe just chunk through it. The edit on this one is really clean, so maybe we'll just move through it a lot faster than expected. But either way, I'm off. I'm going to throw you over to Rame. Say hi to her for me, and I will be back tomorrow early with another stream as we keep chunking through Weremage. Catch y'all then. Bye.
That one's so cute. More like friggin' annoying, but thank you very much. Hello, VlogaNovel. Little raven. I love it. I love the little ones. Too big can't handle, you know. Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you. Okay, ready?